There are no technologies now commercially available that will allow us to convert large trucks to electrical energy. You cannot possibly convert aircraft to electricity. You can't electrify the railways. The production of food in the world would decrease to what it was in the latter part of the 19th century, when we only had to feed 1.5 billion people. Now we have to feed 7 billion people. Without those oil and natural gas products, billions of people would starve. That's the bottom line. Billions of people would starve.
Since the beginning of this pandemic, the term net zero has entered the political world of many governments. Many leaders and elites mention that the goal will be a net zero emission by 2050. But what does this obscure term really mean? Is it really realistic? Or will it have repercussions on the population? Today, I'm speaking with Robert Lyman. He has spent his life working on public policy issues for 10 years as a foreign service officer, and afterwards in a number of positions in which he worked and advised on energy, environment, and transportation. Policy issues within the federal government. Throughout his public service career, Robert worked for 8 prime ministers: Pierre Trudeau, Joe Clark, John Turner, Brian Mulroney, Kim Campbell, Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, and Stephen Harper. He explained what net zero means and all that surrounds this new climate political goal. Let's check it out.
I am an energy economist, and I spent 37 years working in the Canadian federal government. Most of that time, I was an advisor and manager in the energy policy field. And since I retired about 15 years ago, I have been a consultant for governments, advising on energy, transportation, and environmental issues. I have written about 200 articles on these issues, and I have appeared before Parliament as an expert witness on the same issues. The first thing that you have to understand is that net zero is just a slogan. It has very little substantive meaning. This is not about fundamentally reducing emissions. It's about virtually eliminating the access that Canadians have to oil, natural gas, and coal as a source of reliable and affordable energy supplies. So it's all about energy services and the cost of energy services, the availability of energy services, et cetera. That's what it's about. Net zero is just a slogan. Now, that of course leads to the question of, well, why is the use of oil, natural gas, and coal important? Well, it's important because it now supplies 75% of the energy uses that Canadians have. And it's essential. These are secure, reliable, and affordable ways to light and heat our homes, and to allow us to have mobility, to move people and goods from one place to another. Without them, the cost of living and the cost of our economy would rise significantly, and it would seriously affect Canada's competitiveness as a country. Specifically, what the net zero proponents are suggesting is that we must eliminate all use of oil, natural gas, and coal within 28 years, by 2050. And they are essentially arguing that that can be done by taxing hydrocarbon fuels to the point where it becomes unaffordable, by subsidies, particularly to wind and solar industries, and by regulations, and that governments basically will in future decide which energy sources are used, which energy sources are produced, and what the cost of them will be. It will no longer be a choice of energy producers and consumers. So this is all intended to be part of a vast transition in energy systems. And the problem there are several problems with that, which we can get into in the course of our interview. The single most important one is that the cost of the energy sources that are now available to replace hydrocarbons is very high, and they are unreliable as fuel sources. So the idea that you can make a transition from present technologies to future ones in only 28 years is basically impossible. They'll confront the unwillingness of people freely to change their use of energy, because that energy use now provides us not only with heat and light and mobility, but it also is convenience. So people don't give that up easily. The second is that, as I mentioned earlier, the available technologies to attempt to change the energy system are immature and therefore very expensive. The third one is that changing from one energy system to another takes a long time. The energy use that we have is embedded in energy infrastructure, roads and rail systems and airports and aircraft, but also in the vehicles themselves. And so when this has been studied, notably by Vaclav Smil, who is a professor of geography at University of Manitoba and the world's foremost expert on energy transitions, he's basically found that a transition from one energy source to another generally takes something in the order of 50 to 70 years. And that's when the people who are the users, the buyers of the energy, find it attractive economically to do that. That's not what's happening now. People are quite content to use the currently available and affordable energy. The fourth major challenge is the limited availability of the materials that are needed to electrify the economy, particularly lithium and other minerals that are needed to produce the batteries that run electric cars and other forms of electric transportation. There's a worldwide shortage of that, and it's not going to be eliminated soon. And finally, the central challenge is the fact that people generally will be reluctant to have governments make all of the decisions for them about energy supply and demand. It's basically a transfer from a market economy to one that is based on central planning. And politically, it will be very difficult to sell that. The cost of energy will increase significantly. In Ontario, the measures that have been taken to increase the use of wind and solar energy have resulted in a doubling of electricity prices. And the commitment to spend what will become $60 billion in electricity costs over the period of the existing contracts. And that will be the case with respect to other energy sources as well. The next major impact is on the availability and security of supply. If we electrify the entire economy, then that means that anytime that there is an inadequate availability of supply, we'll have brownouts and blackouts. So that will affect people's standard of living and the costs. The lack of availability of oil per se is quite significant because oil is the basis for all transportation fuels. It's not just a matter of, okay, we'll spend $10,000 to $15,000 more per electric vehicle. It means that there are no technologies now commercially available that will allow us to convert large trucks to electrical energy. You cannot possibly convert aircraft to electricity. You can't electrify the railways. private companies will not do that. They won't incur the costs or take the risks. So that means governments would have to nationalize the railways, and they would have to incur those expenditures. And without the availability of oil and natural gas to plow the ground, to move food from where it's produced to where it's needed, and to provide the fertilizers that are currently needed, the production of food in the world would decrease to what it was in the latter part of the 19th century, when we only had to feed 1.5 billion people. Now we have to feed 7 billion people. Without those oil and natural gas products, billions of people would starve. That's the bottom line. Billions of people would starve. So that's a pretty significant impact. The countries of Asia that are the fastest growing countries in the world now have never reduced their emissions. They have never promised to reduce their emissions. They have increased them repeatedly, to the point now where China alone accounts for 30% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and it's constantly increasing. India is coming right behind, and it's us. The less developed countries, the poor countries, if you will, now represent 65%, 2/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. And they have no intention of sacrificing their desire for economic development for their people in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So it's just not going to happen. If governments are able to implement these policies, life will be nothing like it is today. We will all be poorer. We will all be colder. We will all have less opportunity to travel, to make money, to operate our businesses. We will be basically returned to the economy that Canada had in the late 19th century. You know, basically, that's what would happen. So I don't think it's possible, but the costs of these net zero programs are far, far higher in provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan and the North. And they're saying that the major industries in those provinces will have to shut down. And so the question for us will be, will the people of Alberta and Saskatchewan accept that, or will they have their own separatist movement? I think it's a very real possibility that they wouldn't accept it.
So at Ruben News, we want to expose this new green reset that the government elite wish to impose on us. But we started a petition at nogreenreset.com, and in the same time you can donate generously so I can show you the other side of the story of this supposedly green energy. Thank you.